My Nerd World.
Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down. Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down.
Welcome to My Nerd World and Depeche Mode, the podcast. I am your host, John Justice. This is, as far as I know, the first podcast consistent, I'm hoping weekly, if not a bare minimum bi-weekly podcast devoted to Depeche Mode. I have been a fan of Depeche Mode since 86, 87, and there's some wiggle room in there as far as I can remember. I've been trying to pin it down and working out the content for episode 1 of Depeche Mode, the podcast, and I'm fairly certain it's 87, but we'll get into that. My Nerd World was born out of a desire to talk about the things in life that I love that I can't do on my normal show. I am part of Justice and Drew here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I host a morning show along with my best friend Drew and producer Samantha on KTLK, Twin Cities News Talk, twincitiesnewstalk.com, Monday through Friday, 6 until 9 o'clock. I've been doing radio for 20 years. Half of that career, well, actually a little bit less than half of that, was in hosting morning and afternoon shows on music stations, rock stations, alternative rock stations, active rock stations, one classic rock station. And for the past about 10 years now, I've been a talk show host. And apart from God, my wife and children, my family, and my job, the three things in life that I love are Star Wars, Depeche Mode, and NASCAR Dale Earnhardt Jr. These are three things that I love talking about and covering, but I can't do that on a regular basis on my news talk show. So about a year and a half ago, I created My Nerd World, which was essentially just a series of podcasts where I can go and talk about these three things that I love. There's a lot of Star Wars podcasts out there, but I have such a love for Star Wars that I wanted to do one just on my own. And now we are 74 podcasts into the My Nerd World Star Wars podcasts. And Drew and Samantha have joined me on a weekly basis now on that podcast, and we do that podcast again every week. During the NASCAR season, I do a Dale Earnhardt Jr. race preview podcast. And I've been waiting to start my Depeche Mode podcast, a podcast where, again, hopefully once a week, I will be discussing breaking news, news of the day, reviews of new and old music, videos, concerts, solo work by the band members, focusing on specific songs as well. Everything that covers the world of Depeche Mode. And the reason why it's taken me so long to start this, again, I've been doing My Nerd World now for about a year and a half, is that I've been waiting for some new material. I was going to start much earlier. I was going to start doing all three podcasts all at once. And my original idea was to begin the podcast by doing basically song profiles, going back into the catalog, talking about the songs that I love the most from Depeche Mode and breaking those songs down and the things that I love about them. And again, at some point I just decided once we knew the band was heading back into studio that I would wait until we were close to new material being released, and then I would go ahead and start the podcast. Well, we are about, as far as we know, we are about 1 week away from the release of the first single from the brand new album that should be coming out in March of this year called Spirit, Revolution. And you heard a snippet of it in the intro, and I actually have the teaser audio that I'll play for you here in just a moment. The only audio from the new album that we've heard so far, produced by James Ford. So I thought, what better way to kick the volume 1 of the podcast off by not only giving you my own personal history with Depeche Mode, but a bit of a preview of what we can expect of this new album coming out later this year and this first single. Now, I also have, and I'm going to save this for later in the podcast, I also have what is believed to be the lyrics for Revolution. There is no confirmation of this. However, having spent so many years with with the band, this looks like Depeche Mode. These lyrics read like Depeche Mode, and I know there are some people on the home website, which is probably my favorite go-to website for Depeche Mode, one that I've been a member on the board. I don't comment that often on it, but depeche-mode.com is and has been for a long time now the website that I spend the most time on and the message board that I spend the most time on and getting my information from Depeche Mode. And I know that there are some people on there that are somewhat trepidatious that these lyrics are DM, but it reads like DM to me. And if it was somebody making up Depeche Mode lyrics, they did a good job. It's like when I'm covering Star Wars and people are writing leaks. There's a certain formula that people use when they're writing dialogue or trying to describe scenes from a movie. You can just tell when it's fake. It's tough. It's tough to go and fake lyrics especially to a Depeche Mode song. So I'll share that with you here in just a moment. Now, before I get into my background, and I encourage you that if you want to share your history with Depeche Mode, what you love about the band, comment on the podcast, you can always drop me an email, and that email is talkshownerd@gmail.com. Talkshownerd@gmail.com. So before I give you my background and my history with Depeche Mode and what I love about this band, what about Depeche Mode makes, what about them draws me to them and they've been my favorite band for as long as I can really remember having a favorite band. I had no other favorite band before Depeche Mode came into my life. Let's start off with the teaser from the upcoming album, Spirit.
Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down. Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down.
Now, later in the podcast, again, I will get into a little bit more of my thoughts of that of this first single. Some of the controversy already surrounding Revolution we'll dive into, and I'll share with you what is believed to be the lyrics of the song. But I really did want to start off the podcast just giving you basically my history with Depeche Mode. I grew up in Southern California. And for those that are, if you've been a lifelong Depeche Mode fan, you more than likely know that the alternative rock station K-Rock in Los Angeles has been a huge part of the history of Depeche Mode. And really, if it hadn't been for my listening to K-Rock, I may never have been exposed to them. But growing up in the 80s and the 90s in the LA and Orange County area, Depeche Mode were just huge back then. And I remember living in Arcadia, California, on the outskirts of L.A., listening to K-Rock and hearing Shake the Disease for the first time. And again, I remember buying some music prior to listening and hearing Depeche Mode, but nothing had come close to grabbing my attention the way that Shake the Disease did. It was different. Lyrically, it sounded different. This idea of this marriage between meaningful lyrics at a time in my life when I was coming into my own as a kid. I'm 44 now. This was back in 87. And having a song reach out to me at a time when I'm discovering girls and getting in touch with my emotions, it just tapped into something very, I don't want to say deep, but it touched me in a way that I just didn't think music could. And it's funny because I remember going to the record store and looking for the album that Shake the Disease was from. And obviously I was looking for the compilation album Catching Up With. And they didn't have it. And this is really odd too, because they didn't have Catching Up With. And I remember being at the store. And at the time, K-Rock had been playing Flexible too. And so I remember hearing Flexible, the B-side, on K-Rock as well. And I remember seeing Black Celebration sitting there on the rack. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and buy this. I'm just going to go ahead and buy Black Celebration. I don't know anything about it. I don't know the songs on it, but you know, I want some Depeche Mode, so I'm going to go and buy this cassette. Now, when you consider the reason why I wanted Shake the Disease and how much the movie had hit me on a level of relatability with, you know, girls that I liked and having that emotion but still having this pop sensibility to it, and then listening to Black Celebration for the first time, and it was like, here is some pepperoni being Shake the Disease, right? The pepperoni tastes good. Really, really good. A good piece of pepperoni. It's like a good piece of bacon, right? It's just good. And then somebody saying, oh, you like the pepperoni? Okay. Well, check this out. Here's a whole pizza. And it's got all kinds of pepperoni on it. That's what Black Celebration was. Listening to that album for the first time was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch of songs that are reaching out to me the same way that Shake the Disease did. And from then on, it was just this discovery of music. I remember finding Catching Up With, and then being introduced to the back catalog, and then going back and listening to every single album that had come beforehand. Going back and finding Speak and Spell and realizing this was a different band, finding its own. And it sounded different. It was a lot poppier. And then discovering that, there wasn't, Martin Gore wasn't always the songwriter. And then, A Broken Frame. And then realizing Alan Wilder hadn't joined the band yet. And going over to a friend's house and going over to a girlfriend's house, and she had an album, and finding cassettes and then discovering, it was through Depeche Mode that I found out about imports. And I discovered B-sides and what remixes were. It kicked open the door for me and a love for music that has stayed with me my entire life. The way the industry works, and wanting to find out every single thing about this band that I could possibly find out. And by the time Music for the Masses came out, I had already collected the entire catalog in one way, whether it was on LP, whether it was on records, whether it was on cassette tape, still discovering the B-sides and all the different, again, remixes. And I can remember it was the first time that I anticipated a record release, music for the masses.